Formal notice of intended enforcement. Those 5 words hit the Livestock Exchange Building's 14th floor boardroom at 8 a.m. Wednesday. And inside 40 minutes, a $421.8 million federal contract was already dying on the conference table. I wasn't in that room. I was 2 miles away on my back porch on Genesee Street, watching fog burn off the west bottoms of Kansas City, Missouri, capping a stainless steel pen I'd carried for 26 years. Behind me, the kitchen phone rang once, not the bank yet, but it would be inside 45 days when the $533,000 balloon payment on my daughter's lab loan came due. Whatever just died on that conference table was about to become the loudest thing in my house too. My name is Vernon Nash. I'm 56, and for 26 years I was the Quality Assurance Director at Harlow Yates Provisions, the person federal law required to exist before a single case of packaged poultry left that plant carrying a United States Department of Agriculture label, USDA, on every case after that. Before that, I spent 6 years as a commissioned inspector for the Food Safety and Inspection Service, which meant I'd stood on both sides of that clipboard, writing up the exact violations I now spent my days preventing. 2 days earlier, none of that had counted for much in that same boardroom. 2 days earlier, I was legacy overhead, with a pension coming due, and a 34-year-old chief operating officer named Emilio Marchetti had decided the plant could keep shipping without my old chair signing off on anything. He'd said it standing at my desk, tapping his tablet's modernization dashboard like the number on the screen settled it. He was wrong, in the end, by exactly 1 federal warning letter. There was a rule underneath all of it, one I'd built a career standing on top of, plain enough for anyone to understand if anyone had bothered to ask. I'd explain the whole of it soon enough. For now it's enough to know this: 42 hours. That's exactly how long it took the Department of Agriculture to notice Harlow Yates Provisions no longer had anyone willing to put their name on a batch. I hadn't touched a single machine, a single line of code, a single locked door. I'd refused to sign one thing: a defective batch of packaged poultry, flagged on my own inspection 2 mornings earlier, that Marchetti wanted released to a school lunch shipment anyway, and then I'd let 26 years of federal paperwork do exactly what it was written to do. The pen in my hand had signed every batch release form to leave that plant since I turned 30. Its cap still made the same small click it had the first week, worn smooth where my thumb rested 1,000 times a year, the metal gone cool against my palm in the morning air. To Marchetti, when he'd finally noticed it sitting on my desk, it had looked like an old man's cheap pen. To the United States government, it was the only signature in that building anyone still trusted. Fog kept burning off the west bottoms, thinner now than it had been an hour ago. Somewhere across the river, phones were ringing in a building I hadn't worked in for 2 days, over a contract I'd spent a decade protecting and 42 hours not saving. 42 hours had already been ticking by the time anyone up there thought to ask why. Monday started the way it had for 26 years, 6:40 a.m., boots on the catwalk above line 3, the packaging line already running at speed underneath me. I didn't need the vibration sensor to tell me something was wrong with case sealer 4. I felt it through the rail, a half-second stutter in the rhythm, once every 11 or 12 cycles, the kind of hitch that doesn't show up on a dashboard until it's already cost somebody a shift. 26 years of standing over that exact sound had taught me to hear a problem before any report ever caught up to it. By 7:05, I had the case pulled and open on the inspection table, cold air rolling off the packaging line thick enough to fog my glasses for a second before it cleared. Internal temperature on the poultry lot read 4 degrees over spec. Nothing dramatic to a stranger, everything to a federally inspected plant shipping under a USDA label. I'd built the plant's entire food safety plan around exactly this kind of number, back when I was still the newest inspector the government ever sent through that door, learning the hard way that a 4-degree shrug on a Tuesday could be a recall by Friday. I logged it, tagged the pallet, and reached for the pen. 26 years of batch release forms had trained my hand to move before my head caught up. This time it stopped an inch above the signature line. A temperature deviation on a poultry lot bound for a school lunch shipment wasn't a number I was willing to round down, no matter whose quarter it dented. "You're holding 6 pallets over 4 degrees, said Tara Hegday, the Food Safety and Inspection Service inspector the federal government kept stationed in our plant, reading the tag over my shoulder with the flat calm of someone who'd seen every excuse a company could invent for ignoring a thermometer. I'm not signing it, I told her. Not at that temperature, not for that program. She didn't argue. She wrote it down. That was the whole exchange. No shouting, no drama. Just two people who'd spent their careers agreeing that a number on a form only means something if somebody's willing to stand behind it. By 9:15, word had reached the front office that Line 3's release was held. I wasn't surprised when I heard footsteps that didn't belong to anyone from operations. What surprised me was how calm I felt watching them come. 26 years is long enough to know the difference between a problem you caused and a problem you're finally allowed to name out loud. My daughter called at lunch, the way she did most Mondays now, checking on the equipment lease for her own testing lab, the one I'd co-signed a loan against without blinking, because some things you do for family whether or not the bank likes the math. She sounded tired, the kind that comes from running a lab on a shoestring. I told her the shipment was fine. I didn't tell her about the footsteps yet. I capped the pen and set it beside the untouched form, cap click sounding louder than it should have in that inspection bay, and went back to watching the line run, steady, humming, 12 cases a minute, entirely unaware that the 6 pallets sitting behind me were the first thing in 26 years I'd ever refused to sign. Whoever was coming down that hallway had no idea the form still had a blank signature on it, or whose signature the plant actually needed. Emilio Marchetti came down that hallway the way he came everywhere, fast, certain, tablet already in his hand before he'd said a word. Vernon. He didn't look up from the screen. I hear line 3's sitting. 6 pallets. Temperature deviation. I set the printout on the table between us. 4 degrees over spec, headed for a school lunch shipment. That's legacy protocol talking. He tapped the tablet twice, and a red number on his modernization scorecard ticked down half a point, like the plant had just cost him something personal. Risk-based sampling would have cleared this an hour ago. We're bleeding cycle time over 4 degrees. Bottom line it for me, he said, before I'd finished the sentence, a habit I'd stopped taking personally around year 2 of watching him do it to everyone else. The bottom line is a poultry lot 4 degrees over spec doesn't get a school district's name on it. Arthur Nettles, the plant's general manager, had come up behind him without either of us hearing it. 31 years on that floor teaches a man to move quiet. Emilio, he said, low enough not to carry past the 3 of us. Maybe we let Vernon run the second reading before anybody promises a truck's leaving today. Marchetti didn't answer him. He turned the tablet toward me instead, the modernization scorecard glowing between us like it settled something. 12 years ago this line ran on paper tags and gut instinct. It survived. It'll survive one held pallet. 12 years ago this line didn't ship to a federal school program, I said. The rules changed because a plant like this one gave the government a reason to write them. I appreciate the passion, Vernon. I really do. He smiled the way people smile when they've already decided a conversation is over. But we're not running an inspection theater here. It's not theater. It's the reason this plant still has a contract to bleed cycle time on. Everybody in this building thinks their job is the load-bearing wall. He said it lightly, a joke we were both supposed to enjoy. I've read the org chart. Nobody's irreplaceable. Read the other document sometime, I said. The one that says who has to sign before any of this leaves the building. That one landed somewhere. Not on his face. He was good enough to keep that flat, but in the half-second pause before he tapped the tablet again, like the screen owed him a better answer than I had. Get me the second reading by 2, he said, and walked off already composing whatever memo would make this someone else's afternoon. I don't know how many people were actually listening to a channel this new by that point in the story, but if you were, every one of you mattered to keeping it going, and there's another story like this one waiting tomorrow. Standing there with a 4-degree number still on the table, I found myself asking the only question that mattered. Was I protecting a shipment, or finding out exactly how much a 26-year signature was worth to a man who'd never had to earn one? He'll be back at 2, Arthur said, watching him go. Bring the second reading. Bring your printout too. I intend to. He's not wrong that the line's bleeding money holding pallets. He's not wrong about that, I said. He's wrong about which number actually costs him. Compliance doesn't ask anyone's permission to keep working. It just keeps doing its job long after the people in charge stop believing they need it. At 2 p.m., I walked back into the inspection bay with the second reading in hand. 5 degrees over spec now, Worse, not better, and found Marchetti waiting with HR instead of a tablet. Vernon, sit down. He didn't wait for me to. We're restructuring quality oversight. Effective today, your position's eliminated. We're calling it a realignment. Say what it actually is, I said. You're firing the one person whose signature your federal contract needs. We're saving this plant $888,000 a year in redundant oversight. He said it like a number that settled arguments. The same flat certainty from the hallway. Risk-based sampling and a compliance software package replace what you do for a fraction of the cost. I didn't raise my voice. I set the second reading on the table, capped my pen, and slid it into my shirt pocket. The only motion I made in that whole exchange. Is that a question or a decision? I asked. It's already signed off. He tapped his tablet, the screen glowing awake between us like it was casting a vote. Board approved the restructuring this morning. Then I have one question, for the record, and I'd like it noted I asked it. I looked at the HR representative, not Marchetti. Who's replacing me as the plant's designated quality plan authority, effective today, in writing, before I leave this building? Nobody answered right away. That silence told me more than anything on the tablet. The HR representative, a woman I'd trained on release procedures 2 years earlier, glanced at Marchetti before she spoke. We don't have that name finalized, she said. I flagged it this morning. It's being handled, Marchetti said, not looking at her. Legacy protocol treats a signature like it's sacred. It's a formality. It's not a formality once this plant's the one holding the national processing agreement that gets your product into every school district on that contract. I kept my voice level. Somebody has to be legally on record for that plan to still count. Today, nobody is. Then find me somebody by Friday, Marchetti said. I'm not slowing down a restructuring over paperwork. You're not slowing down anything. The paperwork does that on its own schedule, whether either of us slows down or not. Tara Hegde, who'd walked in behind HR without anyone announcing her, glanced up from her own clipboard for the first time since the meeting started. For the record, she said quietly, I'll need that replacement's name and credentials filed with my office too. Same day, if possible. Marchetti's jaw tightened, just slightly, before he smoothed it back into the same confident line he used on everyone. Noted, he said, in the tone of a man filing something he didn't intend to act on. I didn't argue. I signed the separation paperwork, the pen from my pocket, not HR's. Unclipped the badge that still carried my sign-off access, the metal clasp cold against my thumb, and set both on the table where I'd set the second reading. Then I walked out past a floor of people who wouldn't meet my eyes. 26 years doesn't end quietly. It just goes controlled instead. What Marchetti still called overhead was about to become the one signature the plant couldn't schedule around. A safe quality food recertification audit was already on the calendar for that Friday, and not one person in that room understood they were about to walk into it blind. Tuesday morning I sat at my own kitchen table with a manila folder I'd kept for 11 years, ever since I first became the plant's designated authority, my own copy of every letter that had my name filed against it, the kind of thing any responsible party keeps for their own record. My pen sat on the table beside it, cap off, out of habit more than need. To Marchetti, if he'd ever seen it, it would have looked like an old man's paperwork habit. To me, it was the only proof left in Kansas City that Harlow Yates Provisions had ever done this properly in the first place. Arthur called at 8:10, before I'd finished my coffee. You should know Marchetti spent yesterday afternoon telling corporate this was a formality, he said. I want to understand what it actually is before I say anything to the board. The rule's simple, I told him. A federally inspected plant has to have one qualified person legally responsible for its food safety plan on file with the government at all times. Pull that person without a validated replacement in place, and the plant standing with the agency doesn't survive the gap. How long is the gap? 42 hours. That's how long it took the government to notice the last time a plant this size tried it. And I've got no reason to think Harlow Yates gets treated differently. 42 hours from when? From 2 p.m. yesterday. From the moment I stopped being the name on file. Arthur was quiet for a second. That's not a formality. That's the Riverside distribution slot gone for good. If it lapses, we lose that. We don't get it back on the next contract cycle. No, I said. It's $266.4 million in signed federal business that only stays valid because somebody's name is attached to a plan somebody actually verified. Take the name off, and the number doesn't care whose fault that was. He asked the question I'd been waiting for. Even if they name somebody today, even then, the agency doesn't take a new name on a memo. Whoever they put in that chair has to personally revalidate the plan they're now responsible for. Walk it, sign it, own it. That doesn't happen by fax, and it doesn't happen by Friday. I heard him exhale, the particular sound of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. There was a second piece I didn't say out loud yet. That one could wait. Marchetti's already telling people the third-party certification auditors landed at KCI this morning, Arthur said. Said it like good news. I didn't answer that directly. I capped the pen, set it flat across the folder the way I always did when a document was finished, and photographed every page on my own phone, the shutter sound flat and small in the quiet kitchen, then emailed the set to myself and to my attorney. Nothing offensive in it, nothing that touched a system I no longer had access to. Just a man keeping his own paper straight, the way I could tell in one glance which page carried the federal letterhead and which carried the plant's own seal. They'll need somebody who's actually done this before, I said finally, not somebody who's read about it. The rule didn't require me to do anything else. It just required somebody to stop covering for the gap. As of yesterday afternoon, nobody was. It hadn't broken. It was simply doing exactly what it had been written to do. By Tuesday afternoon, Marchetti had turned my old title into a line item on his tracking screen. Arthur described the floor meeting to me secondhand that night, and I believed every word of it. We streamlined quality oversight yesterday, Marchetti told the packaging crew, tablet raised like a preacher with a hymnal, according to Arthur. $888,000 back in this plant's operating budget, effective immediately. That's not a cut. That's discipline, the kind that keeps a $444 million operation lean. Discipline, Arthur repeated to me over the phone, flat. That's the word he used. To a room full of people who'd just watched 26 years walk out the door. What did the room do? Nobody clapped. Nobody said anything either. I wasn't there for it. Tara called that evening, a call I'd started expecting by then. He had Priya Osei covering releases, she said. 2 years in quality, good instincts, no authority to sign anything under the plan you built. She knew it too. I watched her hesitate over the log. What did she do? Signed anyway. Somebody told her it was fine. Who told her that? Marchetti. In front of the whole crew, so nobody could say afterward he hadn't. Priya didn't want to. I could see that much. That's not how the designation transfers. He can't hand her the authority by saying it out loud. I know that. You know that. Tara paused. I don't think he's asked anyone who actually knows that, and I'm not sure he'd listen if he did. That was the mistake. Small, human, exactly the kind Marchetti's confidence made inevitable. Priya wasn't reckless. She was 26 years short of the one credential that actually mattered. Put in a chair that required it by a man who believed an org chart update was the same thing as training. I didn't call anyone about it. I didn't send a note flagging the risk. Didn't offer to walk Priya through the form she'd just signed without standing to sign. 26 years teaches you the difference between protecting people and protecting a decision that isn't yours to fix anymore. One more thing, Tara said, quieter, and I could hear her shift the phone to her other ear. The certification auditors checked into a hotel 2 exits from the plant this afternoon. Early. Somebody on their team requested tomorrow's visitor badge list before close of business. Early's not normal for them. No, she said. It isn't. Usually it's a Thursday arrival for a Friday audit. This is a full day ahead of schedule. Did Marchetti's office know? They know the date. I don't think they know it moved. I sat with that a minute after we hung up. The particular kind of quiet a kitchen gets at 9 p.m. when the refrigerator's the only thing still running, the linoleum cold under my bare feet. 2 separate clocks were closing on that plant now, one federal and mine, one private and Marchetti's own hired auditors, and neither one was going to check with the other before it landed. Marchetti closed his floor meeting, according to Arthur, by holding up his tablet one more time and telling the room the numbers didn't lie. He wasn't wrong about that, not exactly. He was only wrong about which numbers he'd actually been reading and which ones were still coming due. 9 p.m. Tuesday, 11 hours short of 42, and Marchetti had spent the whole day exactly the way he'd spent every day since Monday, celebrating a number that hadn't finished proving him wrong yet. 7:52 a.m. Wednesday. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter before I'd finished my first cup. Arthur, not a number I recognized. The auditors are in the lobby, he said. Early again. Priya's trying to pull the quality plan binder for them, and it's not opening under her login. I didn't offer to fix it. I poured a second cup instead. 8 a.m. 90 seconds later, my phone buzzed again. Tara, this time, her voice flatter than I'd ever heard it. I'm filing the notice this morning, she said. 42 hours since the designation lapsed. No validated replacement on record. I don't have discretion on the timing anymore. I know, I said. You never did. 8:02 a.m. Arthur again. Formal notice of intended enforcement just hit the front office fax. Marchetti's reading it standing up, which is how I know it's bad. What's it say? Grant of inspection, suspension pending review. He's asking me if that's the same as being shut down. Is it? Close enough that I didn't correct him. 8:14 a.m. Priya called next, a number I didn't recognize until she said her name. The binder's locked, she said, talking fast. The auditors are asking who's the responsible party, and I don't know what to tell them. Nobody told me what to tell them. Tell them the truth, I said. That's the only answer that's ever held up in that building. While all three of them were catching fire in that building, I fed the dog, rinsed my mug, and sat back down on the porch because there wasn't a single thing left in that plant that needed my hands on it anymore. 8:47 a.m. Arthur called a third time. Legal's in the building. CFO's on a call with the bank about the National Processing Agreement payment schedule. Somebody just said the words material breach out loud. That's $421.8 million exposed across 42 hours, I said. Just over $10 million an hour since yesterday afternoon. Whoever's doing that math in there isn't going to like where the decimal lands. 9:03 a.m. Tara's notice reached the state agency copy list. 9:15 a.m. The Safe Quality Food auditors suspended their own review pending the federal outcome. A second certification now hanging on the same open question. 9:40 a.m. Priya texted one line. They're asking for you by name and nobody knows what to say. I didn't answer that one. Not because I didn't have an answer, because it wasn't mine to give anymore, and hadn't been since 2 p.m. Monday. 10:02 a.m. Arthur's voice cracked for the first time in 31 years of knowing him. They just put a hold on the loading dock. 6 trucks sitting full, engines running, nobody authorized to sign them out. Who's telling the drivers? Nobody yet. Marchetti's still on the phone with the state agency, trying to explain a document he read for the first time an hour ago. 10:16 a.m. Priya called once more, quieter this time. I keep thinking I should have said something Monday. Refused to sign it, the way you did. You did the job you were given, I told her. That was never yours to refuse. I listened to all of it from a porch 2 miles away, coffee gone cold in my hand, watching the same fog that had burned off the West Bottoms 2 mornings running. The questions coming into that building had already changed shape without anyone there noticing it yet, from what went wrong to, very carefully, whose job it had been to stop it. The boardroom at the Livestock Exchange building still smelled faintly of old radiator heat, even in August, a building that old never quite loses it. Arthur had asked me to come in person Friday morning, 4 days out from Monday's separation meeting. I brought the folder. Marchetti was already at the head of the table when I walked in, tablet dark for once, sitting face down like he'd finally learned it wasn't going to help him. Tara sat near the window with her own file. Arthur stood, which told me more than anything he could have said. Vernon, thank you for coming. Arthur didn't wait for Marchetti. We'd like to discuss bringing you back. Full authority, no contractor arrangement. Effective this morning if you're willing. I set the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. I'm listening. The notice named the exact gap, Tara said, sliding her own copy across. 42 hours with no validated individual on record. That's not disputable. I filed it myself. Marchetti finally spoke. This is a paperwork technicality being treated like a crisis. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit exactly as long as it needed to. No defense, no repetition, nothing beyond what the room had already asked me for. Marchetti's phone buzzed twice on the table, face up, 3 missed calls stacking on the lock screen before he finally flipped it over to a paperwork technicality, Marchetti said again, filling the space I wouldn't, faster now than he'd spoken all week. I can reinstate him this morning. Problem solved. We're back in compliance by lunch. You can't, Tara said. The notice is already filed at the federal level. Reinstating him doesn't erase the gap that already happened. It starts a new validation clock, and that clock doesn't run on your schedule. Then I'm naming him effective retroactive to Monday. You can't retroactively validate a food safety plan, I said. Somebody has to walk it and sign it in real time. That was always the rule. You just never asked anyone who knew it. Marchetti's hand found the tablet and turned it over, screen dark, like it might still have an answer if he could just wake it up. It didn't. Bottom line it for me, I said, quiet, watching him not find anything to say to that. The bottom line is $421.8 million, and it was never a technicality. It was the whole plant. He didn't answer. His hand stayed flat on the dead screen a long moment, the first stillness I'd seen from him since Monday. The boards authorized me to offer full reinstatement, Arthur said, plus back pay, plus a retainer for consulting through the recertification, plus written credit for every colleague who covered for this gap without complaint. I'm asking because this plant doesn't survive next week without you standing in that role again, and I'd rather ask than watch it fail. I'll take the reinstatement, I said, and I want Priya Osei formally trained and certified under me before I ever consider retiring again. She shouldn't have been put in that chair without it, and that's not on her. Arthur nodded once, the nod of a man who'd already known that was coming. Tara made a note in the margin of her own file. Marchetti said nothing at all, which was the first honest thing I'd heard from him all week. His phone still buzzing, face down, against the table. 3 days earlier, that folder had been sitting on a kitchen table nobody in that building had thought to ask about. 3 weeks after that boardroom, I stood back on the same catwalk above line 3, cap off my pen, signing the first batch release under my own name since the Monday everything started. The compressor hummed the same as always. Nothing about the sound had changed. Everything about who was allowed to sign under it had. Harlow Yates' provisions settled with me at $2,090,000. Back pay, the consulting retainer through recertification, and a written acknowledgement naming what the gap had actually cost the company, not what Marchetti had called it. I didn't ask for a number. Arthur's board offered it before I said a figure out loud, the way it should have worked from the start. Emilio Marchetti kept his salary and lost everything that mattered to him about the job. His name came off the plant directory the same week. His old office became a second conference room, tablet docking station, and all. He still holds a title at his father's investment group, technically overseeing portfolio operations, but I hear he no longer sets foot on a production floor without someone from compliance walking beside him. I ran into him once, that November, at a supplier conference neither of us had chosen well. He looked thinner, quieter, like a man who'd finally read the document. I nodded once, the way I would have for anyone. He nodded back and didn't try to talk. That was enough for both of us. The board didn't stop at reinstating me. They wrote a permanent policy into the operations manual. No designated quality authority leaves that building again without a validated, trained successor certified and on record first. The exact gap that had almost cost them a federal contract, closed for good, for whoever holds my chair after I finally do retire. Priya Osei finished her certification under me in October. She didn't need much teaching. She'd already learned the part that mattered most. The day she signed something she shouldn't have, and spent the next week owning that she had. The certification auditors came back in September and passed the plant clean. Tara filed her own final report the same week, closing the federal review with the designation properly restored, the kind of paperwork nobody notices except the people whose jobs depend on it. My daughter's balloon payment came due on schedule, and I paid it in full the week the settlement cleared. No drama. The way you close out a debt that was never really about the money. Her lab passed its own inspection 2 months later, calibration logs clean, no findings. I keep meaning to ask her to teach me how the new equipment works. She keeps telling me I already know, which is her way of saying thank you without saying it out loud. A trade paper out of Washington ran a short piece on the whole thing that fall. Not my name, just the shape of the story, filed under a headline about staffing gaps at federally inspected plants nationwide. The kind of thing plant managers in a dozen states would read over coffee and quietly go check their own paperwork after. I didn't read past the first paragraph. I already knew how it ended. These days I still keep the pen in my shirt pocket, cap on, mostly out of habit. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. That was never revenge. That was just a signature, finally back where it belonged.